Hello and welcome. My name is Wes, and this is the Universal Life Church of Massachusetts. And today is Easter Sunday, so I want to talk about Jesus and the resurrection. But before we get into that, I want to say thank you to all the subscribers and your comments. And if you're new to this channel, please hit the subscribe button down there in the corner. It will really help me out. And if you want to support me, you can support the sponsor, which is thehipbee.com. I'll put the website on the screen here. And that is my beekeeping business. And I sell honey and beehive products. So please check it out. Today, I want to talk about Jesus because it's Easter. And there are all religions have an esoteric and an exoteric teachings. The exoteric is the outside, what most people go to church and what they learn about Jesus. And this is what the general public is taught. And what they're taught is Jesus was a person who died for their sins, and he performed miracles. And after he was crucified on Good Friday, he stayed 3 days and then was resurrected. Stayed 3 days in a tomb and then was resurrected, came back from the dead. And he's been known to walk on water and perform amazing miracles. Now, if this story seems a little far-fetched, that's because it is meant for the general public, the learners, the ones that are not ready for the truth. And how do we know they're not ready for the truth? Because they believe that story that has outrageous claims in it. When you're ready to question the original story, you can look deeper and find out what it really is. And you know, there are a lot of things in the Bible that are not true. They're just allegories. When you hear of a talking snake or a talking donkey or a human being walking on water, well, you have to use your common sense and understand that maybe this isn't a true story, but it's a mythical story with a deep spiritual meaning, which is just as important as if it was true, because it's still trying to teach you something. And if you are familiar with this channel, you will know I teach and talk about the esoteric teachings, which are the hidden teachings, which are closer to the truth. What the teachings are trying to get you to learn. All right? They're also called occult, because occult, the word occult, is not an evil, a bad word. It comes from the Greek word called occultus, which means hidden. It is hidden information. When you say occult information, that means it's hidden from the general public because they're not ready for the truth and they can't handle it. And some may not be able to handle the stories and the information I'm about to give them, but generally they've already left by now. It's only those who seek the truth that listen. All right, so now that I've give you a little bit of background on the two different stories, the esoteric and the exoteric, let's get more into the esoteric teachings. First of all, there is no proof that Jesus existed anywhere. You can find, there's no proof. There's nothing. People tend to think the shroud is some kind of proof, but it's clearly been debunked over and over and over. But people are going to cling to whatever they want to believe. But there is no proof. And the story of Jesus is very similar to other stories. Krishna and Mailita. There are other deities that have a very similar resurrection, like Jesus. So we have to look at what Jesus, the story, was really talking about, what it's really talking about. And it's talking about this resurrection from hell to heaven, this change from when the ego dies. It is not, Jesus was not an actual person. This is what the esoteric teaching is. I'm going to tell you right now. The story of Jesus is about you and your mind and your psychology and how you grow up and learn from society, and you build an ego, and you think you have to defend this ego. And the ego does defend itself every time, your feelings are hurt. That's your ego. And it isn't until you examine this self. Ego is selfish. It always tries to protect itself. But Jesus, the story of Jesus, was trying to teach us to be selfless. In order to be selfless, like Jesus was, because he helped the poor, he helped the sick, those who are in need. Acts of selflessness. When you do that, you are releasing the selfishness, which is the ego. That's what the ego represents, selfishness. And that's what the story of Jesus is telling us. If you act selflessly, you can kill the ego. And when the ego dies, it dies for the sins that you've made in your life, because you realize you're only hurting yourself. Because when the crucifixion of Jesus is a representation of you coming to the understanding that when you do selfish things to other people, you're doing selfish things to yourself, because selfishness is evil, and when you do evil, you harm yourself. And that is a truth that most people don't understand, because they're too busy focusing on the damage your evil is doing to others, and not what it's doing to you and your psyche and your mind. It creates suffering. And when you realize this, you don't want to do selfish things anymore. And there becomes this enlightenment, a learning of something profound about life and the universe, and how this world we live in, this dualistic world of electromagnetic fields, like a magnet, there's a positive and a negative pole, and human beings and emotions are those magnetics. And how you act, you attract other people to you. And when you learn all this, and you start to see the real world as it is and stop living the illusions of the past, your ego dies because you don't want to be selfish anymore. And you need to put all this information together that you've just learned. And it's a very, very profound moment, the point of enlightenment, which is the ego death, which is the point of the crucifixion, when your old self dies. And then when this happens, there is a period of time when the psyche and the mind and you, when you've come to this point of enlightenment through your acts of selflessness and your understanding of how it works, there comes a point where you don't know what's true and what's not, because you've just learned something so profound that you have to go back and change all your thoughts about how you see the world. Your whole perception changes with this knowledge. It's an epiphany. It's an awakening. It's a rebirth when the ego dies. And it takes about 3 days to go through the dark night of souls, or the laying in the tomb for 3 days, as the story of Jesus teaches us. That is the dark night of souls. And when you are reborn after those 3 days, you have a clearer understanding, you are more selfless, you have a new perspective on life, and you are on the side of good. Whereas before you may have been in hell. Because that's what it is. That's what the whole story of heaven and hell is. You live in hell until you get to this point of enlightenment. And then you realize you're living in heaven. This world you live in is heaven. But you have to be able to see it in the right perspective to understand. There is nothing you can imagine in the human mind more beautiful than the world you live in. But if you're too busy focusing on the death and the destruction and the hell that also is here, because you can't have heaven without hell, you can't have good without bad, you can't have up without down. Because if you did, you wouldn't know what to call it. It wouldn't exist. So, this is the story that Jesus is talking about. It is a mythical story about yourself and your mind and the process of enlightenment. Now, I also want to point out that this has been known for thousands of years. This is nothing new, this thing about enlightenment. That's what every religion is trying to teach. This process of psychology that the human mind goes through. Not everybody goes through it. A lot of people die. They never experience the secret of life, and they live and die, never finding out the greatest secret of life itself. A lot of people do. But those that seek it, it's not an easy journey, because you have to lose your mind to find it. And when I say that, what I'm saying is you have to look at how your mind works and thinks. You have to examine it so closely, all your emotions and how you act. And the dualistic, every emotion has an opposite. And you've got to get in and examine all of them. And when you do, some people lose their way because they see the world living all these lies, because that's what it is. We live lies we think are true, and people can get lost in conspiracy theories, and they can get confused as to what is true and what isn't when they're on this journey. And it isn't until the journey's complete that they can put things together through the form of enlightenment. Now, in ancient times, this same story that I'm talking about, the enlightenment, the resurrection of Jesus Christ, which is actually talking about you and your enlightenment, was also saved as a story in the stars. And ancient people would tell this story, the ones that knew it, would tell it to other people, and the only way, because if they didn't have writing, so in order to tell a story so that people would remember it and tell it correctly, is they had to link the story to something that we can see. And the night sky and the stars were what they used. And in these ancient times, Jesus is the Son of God. The sun you see in the sky, way back before all these religious stories, that was the Jesus. That was the story we're talking about the resurrection. And it had a cycle, had a pattern, and it went around, and at the end of the pattern, on Christmas, the winter solstice, the sun passes through the Southern Cross constellation. And then it sets in the same spot for 3 days and stops moving all year long, or at least from the summer solstice all the way to the winter solstice. The sun is moving and setting lower and lower in the sky each day until it stops on the 21st of December, and then does not move again for 3 days, and then when it does move, it starts going back in the other direction, and the days start getting longer. Those 3 days in the tomb are what they use to represent the dark night of souls, which later turned into Jesus' 3 days in the tomb. And when the sun resurrects, that's your rebirth and enlightenment. And this story has been told over and over. And the story on Easter is another telling of the same story. The crucifixion, 3 nights in the tomb, resurrection, comes back to life. But it's just, and this story is told all over. Krishna, the resurrection of Krishna, and Milita, and there are others. There's probably about 25 other similar stories talking about a renewal and a resurrection. And what they're talking about is you, but nobody knows that. They think it's all these invisible wizards in the sky, these mythical beings. And it's not. It's about you. And right now, we're at a difficult time because there is a crisis going on with this COVID-19 virus, and there's a lot of suffering. And for all those out there who are suffering through this, you have my thoughts. And I don't want to say prayers because people think I'm praying to an imaginary being in the sky. But I will say prayers because what prayers really mean is I care about you. And I can't understand the suffering that some may be going through, but I wish you less suffering in the future. And we should all work together to limit that. During these times, though, like I said, we live in a dualistic world, and for all the suffering, there's going to be education and learning. We learn from our suffering. Sometimes we have to learn by the suffering of others. But we owe it to them to learn. or their suffering and sacrifice is wasted. And there are a lot of things we can learn from this pandemic that's going on. And we can look at how we live our lives right now and what we really need in it and all the waste. Because when this pandemic is over, you're going to be barraged with advertisements telling you that you are not a good person unless you buy this. If you love your family, you need to buy this. You need to go to Disneyland if you want to have fun in life. But I think this pandemic is making people realize what they're really grateful for is just to be alive and healthy. And that's what the suffering of so many other people are teaching us right now. And we don't need that trip to Disneyland or that new car. It doesn't make you a better person, and it doesn't make you more happy. It entertains you for a while like a child with a toy. But that wears out, because if you're not happy inside, all the toys in the world ain't going to make a difference to you. But materialistic people think it does until they have it. And then there's a reason why rich people commit more violent crimes against each other and murder over money and suicide than poor people do. Because it doesn't create happiness. Money can give you the things you need to survive. But if you think it's going to make you happy beyond that, you're greatly mistaken, because you're living a lie. You can be happy with food, water, and shelter. That's all you need, because you're happy right now that way. Some people may want more than that, but that's all you need. And these are the lessons that hopefully we will learn when this is all over, that we're not going back to the society that we had. A lot of people want to go back to that society, but it's not going to be there for you when you come back. It's changing. We're at a great moment of change right now. And a lot of people are awakening to the fact that they did elect a moron. And he's not worthy of the job. He failed. He was golfing when he should have been paying attention to a major crisis coming to his shore. But he tried to gaslight it and tell everybody, it ain't going to bother anybody. There's 0 deaths. We'll be down to 0 soon. But you can't gaslight a virus like you can gaslight some of the people that he finds so easy to gaslight. All right. I think that's about all I want to get into today. On this Easter Sunday, we talked about the resurrection of Jesus and what that really means, and the rebirth of the human mind. And I've talked about all this before, but I wanted to also point out that after this pandemic, we're going to go back to a new world, a new, more conscious world. And it's starting right now. So please hit that subscribe button, hit a like, make a comment. All those things help me out. And until next time, peace.